Hello and welcome to Echo Radio, where we go over the most effective ways of running an online business so you can work smart and live free. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs who want to create, launch, and run an online business without the years of trial and error. Hosted by me, Adrian Harrison. Hello and welcome to all you devilishly handsome cats and kittens, and welcome to another episode of Echo Radio, where it is my job to share the struggles, joys, failures, and triumphs of anyone who embodies pursuing their passion in some form or another. We tease out the thoughts, routines, and strategies that have gotten these entrepreneurs to where they are now so that you may learn and apply some of their valuable lessons back to your own lives. This episode is the most revolutionary to date. You'll be listening to my interview with Autumn Simon of Matryx.ai. It's a collaborative research and development engine optimized for virtual reality interfaces. I also think it's potentially the key to future technological innovation on a massive scale. So that's exciting. The interview is so jam-packed with goodness. Originally weighing in at 2 hours and 25 minutes raw, it was quite the monster. So you may have to listen to it in multiple sittings. Consider yourself entertained for the next 3 to 4 commutes. We cover so much in this episode. We covered in-depth subjects like what is Matryx, what is Nanome, blockchain, Ethereum. We cover initial coin offerings, token sales, pre-selling, i.e. how to fund your startup without trading equity. We cover who are the leaders of the blockchain movement, and the single biggest thing that you can do that will bring you the highest amount of returns. We also cover beginner FAQs like why you should work for free when starting out, how to land the best internships, how to get involved in tech entrepreneurship or your field of choice, how to overcome any tough decision using 2 Stoic exercises, Mark Zuckerberg's hiring rule and the 3 crucial qualities to hone in order to get hired by the best companies, and the most important things to start with in a theoretical 12-week mentorship program. There's also fun ramblings like what an all-meat diet looks like and feels like. We talk about how Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are microdosing on LSD. We talk about meditation. We talk about learning how to love reading if you don't already. We talk about minimalism. There's something for everyone in this episode. Although, if you're not a fan of listening to the whole thing, I invite you to check out the show notes at echostudio.co/podcast or in the episode description if you're listening to the podcast's app or watching on YouTube to see all the topics discussed with marked timestamps you can just skip to. Although for this episode, I really have to emphasize you should definitely check out the show notes on the Echo Studio website because they are extensive. There are tons of videos, books, articles, and links all documented and explained that you do not want to miss because they play an integral role in understanding this episode, and they will teach you so freaking much. Autumn and I have also prepared an incredibly valuable free resource for all of you dedicated aspiring entrepreneurs as a thank you for supporting us. It's called the Ultimate Product Pre-Validation Calculator, and it's the worksheet both Autumn and I use to test the validity, costs, and projected reach and revenue of a proposed product before investing any resources. That means you can use it to test any and all of your ideas before wasting any time or funding. It will also be available for download on this episode's show notes, so you can find it by visiting echostudio.co/podcast and clicking on the episode with Autumn. On top of that, Matryx's token sale ends on Wednesday, November 15th at 10 a.m. sharp. So if you want to get in on the ground floor before this Colossus takes off, I would definitely visit Matryx.ai before then. These links will also be in the show notes. I mean, these show notes are like an encyclopedia made especially for the needs of aspiring tech entrepreneurs. Either way, it was an absolute honor and really, really fun to record, and I'm sure you'll pick up on how much Autumn and I got along vis-a-vis our tendency to jump and build on each other's ideas. So, now that you're salivating in anticipation as much as I was, I present to you episode 4 of Echo Radio, How to Create Revolutionary Innovation Running a Software Business with Autumn Simon of Matryx. Enjoy. Adam,
Yeah.
welcome to an episode of Echo Radio.
All right. I'm happy to be here. It's autumn. Remember?
Oh shit!
Yeah, I
that's
told you.
right.
This
Oh
is
shit!
good.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll start over.
No. Keep it in there. I
Okay.
could keep going. Because that's how it always goes.
Autumn and Bob.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you tell people how we know each other? How we met?
Yeah. So I saw an ad for Bumble Business on the L train a couple days ago. I've been known to use Bumble and Tinder. Never really that successfully, but I thought the business angle was brilliant. So I hopped on there, and much to my surprise, like there were a ton of wonderful people. I'm gonna meet up with several of them in the next week or so, and Adrian reached out to me. It seemed like what our interests were aligned, and I was very interested in the podcast and helping this thing get up and running. So, yeah. I'm excited to be here.
Super pumped. Yeah. Who would have thought that a dating app would actually turn out to be useful? But yeah, no, it was super awesome. So we're now in Autumn's workspace. We just did a live demo, or I just did a live demo of Matryx. It is super cool. And Nanome's
software suite.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, Adam, you magnificent human being. Tell us about Nanome. Tell us about Matryx. What are they, and what are you doing for them?
Yeah, so Nanome's a company I've been involved with for almost 3 years now, just over 2. They're a VR software company developing VR interfaces for scientists, engineers, mathematicians, basically anyone in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. They're based out of San Diego, in the UC San Diego system. It's started by my good friends Keita Funakawa and founder Steve McCloskey. I recently signed on full-time a few months ago, and I've been helping to develop our projects in the blockchain space, specifically Matryx, which is a new company, a subsidiary company that we started to do international business and to create a platform for collaboration on the blockchain. So a decentralized way to crowdsource science, incentivize people to compete and work together to innovate and create new ideas. And I'm managing that project, working with internal and external teams on the technical, creative, marketing sides, and trying to make it a success. So that's what I've been up to lately, among many other things. And I'm super stoked to be on this team. I'm one of about 10 to 15 full-timers, as well as a team of 40 contractors or so. And it's so exciting, and I'm very excited to share. Yeah.
Dude, Matryx is super cool. Could you explain to listeners in simple terms what the blockchain is?
Yeah, so this is something that the entire blockchain community is still trying to figure out how to do, is how to articulate this. It's a blockchain is essentially a way of storing information reliably with consensus for everyone in a very open way. It's the closest thing we have today to objective truth. Blockchain is a term originally used to describe the way Bitcoin, sort of the backbone of Bitcoin, which is the original cryptocurrency. But all a blockchain really is a distributed ledger, or almost a distributed spreadsheet, where everybody has the exact same copy at all times and everybody agrees on it. It's a little nebulous at first, but once you get it, sort of everything falls into place, and it's a very new idea, and it's an idea that, like most new ideas, it's one of these things where you kind of pick up bits and pieces and nothing makes sense, and then all of a sudden it all just will click. So we'll talk about blockchain a lot, I assume, over the next hour or two, and hopefully, I wouldn't expect everybody to get it all at once at first, but maybe let it ruminate for a day or two, read an article. And I think for most people, it'll click, and you'll really start to see the possibilities opening up. What it means to have a sense of objective truth, what it means to have a universally agreed upon body of data. And that body of data can be anything from financial transactions, like in cryptocurrency, to scientific innovations, like in Matryx, to arts or music. But I think that's the simplest way of explaining blockchain and trying to get
the
there.
Possibilities are endless, so it's incredibly hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be putting some very good videos that explain the blockchain on the show notes, as well as a link to the introduction to Matryx, which is a really good video and explains it super well. So normally I ask entrepreneurs how they knew their idea was worth pursuing as opposed to the other options in their idea journals. But in your case, the choice seems very obvious because both companies are doing such incredible work. So I'd just like to know, how did you find them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this story goes all the way back to when I was 14 or 15 years old. And a buddy of mine at my high school, I went to a school called Mid-Pacific Institute, which is a very progressive, technology and arts-oriented school. I was a sophomore in high school, and a friend named Keita Funakawa, a stranger then, reached out to me and asked if I wanted to be involved in a partner program we were doing with PBS Hawaii. It was called Hikino, and it was one of the first student-run television news organizations that was being broadcast on PBS in a primetime slot. And since then, it's inspired, I think, dozens of similar broadcasts. But he asked me if I wanted to get involved. He was sort of spearheading the project at our school, and I said sure. And he and I formed a partnership and a relationship that has lasted almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
Which is really incredible. Working on everything from small human interest stories for PBS to Matryx. And so Keita and I started a small not-for-profit organization when we were in high school doing public interest media called Junior Ruckus. It was a ton of fun, and when he went off to college 2 years before me, he went to UCSD, I went to NYU Tisch for film. Keita studied economics and media production. I studied writing for television and fiction. But we'd frequently meet back up in Hawaii or New York or San Diego. And ideally, we'd get some gigs here and there. So we'd get to work on media productions for some of our peers who are entrepreneurs, or, we've got to work with cool authors at HarperCollins. We've gotten to work with, and then we got to work with Nanome before it was Nanome. So Keita was at UCSD, I think he was a sophomore or junior, and he said, hey, I linked up with this guy, Steve McCloskey. He's a virtual reality developer, and he's also a nano engineer, and he wants someone to create a video for him. And I was like, whatever, man. Like, I'm in San Diego, I'm 18, and, all I want to do is party, but sure. So we met up with this guy, Steve, and keep in mind, Keita is like a young economist, like a clean-cut, good-looking guy. I was like a shaggy, scrawny, barely or just turned 19-year-old artist, a filmmaker, and we meet this guy in this laboratory in the nanoengineering department of UCSD. He's like this 6'3" rugby player. He's pale and redheaded, and he's wearing a lab coat. And he starts explaining to us what he's doing, and he's creating. So at the time, he started a company called NanoVR, and they were creating virtual reality interfaces for nano engineers. And Steve had recently graduated from the inaugural class of the world's first nano engineering program at UCSD, which is incredible. Also, like, the polar opposite of of the people in my circle and in my life. Not that I was like one of those people who hated sciences or math, but I was so immersed in the arts world in New York and back home that I would never even think of interacting with a guy like this.
Right.
So Steve explained what his project was that he had gone to nano engineering school, and anytime he wanted to nano engineer something, he had to draw it on a chalkboard or use some terrible piece of software. And he said, well, VR is the solution to this. And I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. This guy seems really driven and whatnot. So we'll make you a video for cheap or free, and you just keep us involved. So sure enough, we did, and I actually just found the link to that video. So I want to put it in the show notes or give it to you.
We'll put that.
It's super funny. I was like, let's just, in like 12 hours, we created this like tacky promo for his company for some startup competition. We had so much fun doing it. And then that night, there's some things I can't talk about. I talked to lawyers. But that night, we ended up sort of eating some things and hanging out in the laboratory, the Nano VR lab at the time. And Keita, my partner, myself, and Steve end up having like the most insane sleepover ever in a virtual reality nano engineering lab.
A nano engineer, an artist, and a business economist.
Yeah, and we're all sitting there. Steve's vision really started to click that night, and it was so important. And I started to send developed this sense of importance and this sense of value for the sciences and for math, which were things I was very much interested in when I was much younger. But they started to seem more important to me, and I realized that this guy had the same inspiration that I had and the same drive that I had in the space of the arts, he had in the sciences. And that was really, really cool, and I began to see that there's not a thick black line between these two spaces, that it really is a gradient. And I thought to myself, I want to exist, somewhere on that gradient, like right in the middle. So, long story short, over the next couple of years, I would fly out to San Diego, sort of consult with Steve and Keita on their project. Keita signed on full-time with Nano.ai and became Nanome. We've seen effectively 2 seed rounds. We've developed 3 amazing pieces of software, and now we're working on blockchain. And I finished up my undergrad in 3 years so I could get to work full-time on this project. And, things have really developed really organically, and we're all super happy to be where we are. This team is incredible. It's diverse, and what Steve wanted to do and what we all want to do now, I think, is such a true and empathetic and compassionate and altruistic mission, which is to shatter the interfacial bottlenecks choking science. And we'll talk more about what that term means, but to really dive in to science and make it easier and more accessible for people like me who were eventually turned away from it when we should have been diving head first.
There are so many things I want to unpack in that, and we breezed over this, but this is like a really important point. That decision to offer your work for free or cheap just because you want to get involved is something like most beginners don't even think about, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people are kind of egotistical starting out in that they're so worried about making money that they don't conceive of like the relationship.
Right. So this is such an arts thing, because when you work in the arts and when you're making films as a student, even when you're making films for clients, like when you really, generally people who pursue the arts from a young age really love the arts, and the whole notion of charging someone for it is so preposterous. Like I'd feel bad. I had to charge clients with Junior Ruckus, and it was something I had to learn.
Right.
And you charge them, and it's actually very profitable if you're doing what you do well. And it's like, what? No, but I just want to do this.
Paid for what I love doing?
Yeah,
what?
It's so weird. So that was something I just sort of learned, that fee for service. What you do brings value to other people, then you should be getting paid for it. But in the arts, it's so common to help people, give people 40 hours of your time and expect some reciprocation. Usually they'll help you too, but as far as cash, no. So, I mean, and having that sort of naivety and that like, I'm not going to charge people, that has helped me build such a small and tight and powerful network.
Yes.
I don't believe in networking, really. I'm not someone who goes out and goes to events and tries to shake hands and exchange business cards. I've never believed in it, but I've always believed in even making cold openers via email, reaching out to people that really, really matter and searching for quality and working for them, working with other people for free. And what I've always expected in return is that I'm going to learn a lot. And usually it's 10x learning a lot. It's new connections, new inspiration, and potentially money opportunities, which are a whole nother thing that I had never even considered.
Yeah. What would you say were the key triggers that got you more involved in this project than the norm?
So there's so many things, and I get involved in a lot of projects, but this particularly I mentioned before, the vision was so altruistic, and it was so really wholesome. And Steve McCloskey, our CEO, is just this guy, and he's brilliant. He's actually very social and charismatic. And from the start, this project has never been about money. It's never been about rapid scaling or getting the biggest seed round or getting the biggest Series A. That's all comes secondary to, hey, I want to make sure that kids in schools with DSL in impoverished regions in East Africa have the same access to science as kids in private schools in America and Switzerland. That was really Steve's goal from the start. He was like, I just want to democratize science. I want to make it more accessible. And I was like, wow, that's fun.
Yeah, that's fun. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah, and it feels good to work with this company. It feels good to know, I'm not the type of person who likes to work 80-hour weeks, but there are people in the company who do. And I was telling them, I was like, that sounds awful. And they're like, well, it would be awful if I was working for Goldman Sachs, but I'm working for Nanome. And it's like, damn, that's that's so rare to hear.
Yeah.
That there's an ethical and value-driven sort of framework for the work that we put in. And then the other thing is, Nanome is a team of engineers and software developers and scientists, and they're major nerds. And I'm a bit of a nerd too, but I come from an aesthetic and arts background, and I really see all the time how necessary it has to have people with an aesthetic background and a sort of more human-oriented, interaction-based values on a team. And I think I bring that value every day, and I'm proud to, and I'm happy to. Just as they bring certain more pragmatic and technical value to the team and to my life, I get to bring some aesthetics and some style, which I love. Yeah.
Figuring out where you can add value and then working really hard to add the best value there.
Right, yeah.
How were you introduced to tech entrepreneurship, blockchain, and then later the fusion of the two?
Yeah, so this is so funny. You know, I've always been into the arts. I was always into traditional academics too, and I excelled in my school, but I sort of shifted more towards the arts as I entered, puberty and adolescence. And people would always tell me, like, oh, you're so smart or whatever, you're going to run a tech company. Because that's sort of the de facto, like, role of, like, the good student in this world now is to become Mark Zuckerberg.
They're like the bankers of today.
Yeah, they're the bankers of today, exactly. It's to go to Silicon and get your billions on and whatnot. But,
right.
like, for me, people would tell me that, like, you're going to start a tech company. I'd be like, that's the most soulless. Like, no, I'm not. Like, but
don't say that.
Yeah,
I'm not going to start a tech company.
Absolutely not. But the other thing was, I was excelling in the arts, and I was having fun making movies, and they were getting attention, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. But I had never glorified the idea of being a starving artist. I liked the idea of being able to live off your work and your art, but I didn't like the idea of potentially, infringing on quality of life and well-being to maintain some sort of delusional sense of purity in my work. And people, when I was first making films that were getting some moderate attention, people would say, like, hey man, you gotta feel the fire, like I'd be like, okay, like, that's great. Fortunately, like, my parents pay my rent and for everything in my life, so just that's not really a priority right now. And I got older, I said, okay, I do have to feel the fire. And I do want to do it through movies, but I wouldn't mind doing it through some other thing that felt fulfilling. I don't want to have to do it by working as a barista. So
yes,
that's when tech entrepreneurship has always sort of kept it in my backpack as something I could do. And then I started realizing, oh, I could do this, do it well, make an impact. And then, light that fire and then fuel the art fire as well. And I stopped seeing them as so separate. I see both tech entrepreneurship and the arts as both ways of cultivating quality and making a positive impact in the world. But how I got into blockchain specifically, in the more pragmatic sort of play-by-play of how I ended up being a tech entrepreneur and working with other tech entrepreneurs, is a really funny story. I've always been into technology. I've always cared, been a power user on whatever laptop I had growing up. I knew how to use my cameras. I liked to jailbreak my iPhones, whatnot. Nothing too crazy, little bit of background in some basic Python and JavaScript, all that, but never pursued that too actively. And it was also like a troubled teenager. I also got suspended from my high school a few times, or middle school a few times, I guess, and a bunch of other, troublemaking stuff. And I wanted to buy a fake ID when I was like 15 in 2011, and I was trying to find ways. One way was to manufacture it yourself, which I think I did try, and it was awful. And the other way was to buy something called Bitcoin and email somebody something. It was very confusing. Anyways, I think in 2011, I think I was 14 or 15, I purchased around $200 of Bitcoin to buy one fake ID at about $10 a Bitcoin by meeting this guy at a Jamba Juice. Taking the bus.
Infamous Jamba Juice.
Taking a bus to a Jamba Juice by my house.
Where real business gets done.
Yeah. Meeting somebody I met on Craigslist and giving him cash from my bank, my nearly empty bank account, so he could send money onto a code on a piece of paper. I was terrified. It was weird. Then I was sitting in world history class, or IB World History, I think in my junior year of high school, or maybe senior year, 2013, and all of a sudden that $200 I had spent printed on a piece of paper and forgot about was worth like 10 or 15 grand. So immediately this became my entry point into the world of Bitcoin, which was, for me, the chaos of currency. It was peak adolescence. I was super into, hip hop and whatnot, and it was a gateway into that world where I could have any drug I wanted. Fake IDs very easily, cash. It was wild. It was extremely hedonistic, and Bitcoin just became this sort of the ultimate indulgence for me. That's all it was. From the time I was 17 to 18 or something like that. And it was a way of getting whatever I wanted and what everybody else wanted too. It was a ton of fun. At the same time, when I was starting at age 12, I started working at a production company called Kinetic Productions in Honolulu, doing big budget commercials and really small budget feature films. And this ties into the fueling the fire thing. Is we were working with big YouTube stars at the time. So Justin Chan, Kev Jumba, Ryan Higa, these Asian Americans like myself who had developed this huge following, like 3 million, 5 million people, which was the biggest we had ever seen. And they wanted to monetize it, but they couldn't figure out how, so they'd make these feature films, and then they're like, okay, how do we sell this? Our audience isn't big enough to bring it to a movie theater, but it's way too big to just make ad revenue off YouTube. So I helped to design some alternative direct customer distribution models. This was something Louis C.K. was trying at the time with his $5 comedy special with no DRM. So we tried for something very similar. I came up with the idea to create a paywall where users could pay by texting a certain message to a certain phone number, and this could circumvent the whole credit card issue when your audience is 12 to 18 years old and they don't have credit cards or debit cards. How do you make them buy something online or enable them to buy your movie? Well, they can text and charge their parents. So I created a paywall like that with a company called Uwala, and a company called Zong, which later got acquired by PayPal. So that was my sort of first entry point into alternative economic models and media distribution. It was a small project that I worked on when I was 16 or 17. At the same time, Bitcoin was sort of picking up and playing a larger role in my life. So I continued to sort of brainstorm on new models for media distribution throughout the rest of high school. I was in the International Baccalaureate, where you write like a extended essay. It's like a 20-page research paper. I did mine on direct-to-customer media distribution models, and I'm super into it. It was one of the coolest things I got to do in high school. And then I continued to do some writing and research on the side in college, and took some classes about media distribution. And I really was like, wait a minute, I don't want to make any films until I know I can sell them well. And I know I can sell them in the most effective way. So I was designing, at the time, what I called a peer-to-peer content distribution model with distributed payments. I didn't really know what I was saying. It turned out that this was something that could be built on Ethereum, a decentralized media network. And all of a sudden, at some point I realized, right when Ethereum was picking up, and I was finally acknowledging what it actually was.
And for the noob listeners there, Ethereum is another cryptocurrency.
Yeah, Ethereum is sort of the Bitcoin's little brother that's far more capable and agile. It's not just a cryptocurrency, but it's also a platform for distributed computing, or building out platforms with blockchain technology. So right as Ethereum was picking up, I said, oh shit, like maybe this system I've been working on can be built on Ethereum, and it all clicked. And so I started actually reading more about Bitcoin, reading more about cryptocurrency and blockchain, and all of a sudden this big shift in thinking happened, which was, to young people and in counterculture, money is typically considered this thing that's like inherently evil. Money is the symbol of how difficult everything has become in modern society. Well, when I started reading about blockchain and really understanding what Bitcoin was, down to the technical level, suddenly it became clear that there was a way to make money, instead of evil, a symbol for a unity and truth and consensus and democracy. And that got me really excited, and that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to get involved with Bitcoin, I'm going to get involved in blockchain, I'm going to dedicate myself to it, and it's going to improve every aspect of my life and every aspect of other people's lives.
Yeah. So when you were getting started, we talked about the the LinkedIn profiles and how you were introduced to that.
Yeah, so I was a 16 or 17-year-old who was getting moderate success with my films. They were at festivals, winning awards. You know, I had a lot of friends at school. I had a great community. I had $10,000 cash of spending money that was constantly growing and whatnot, and and I was also just like arrogant. I was just this awful like Kanye West inspired 16-year-old, and some would say I still am, but you know, I was this really driven young solopreneur, and I was excited. I was doing a lot of things with my movies, and it was working out well. Then of course I went to college. I started having to pay rent, started having to feed myself, and nobody knows who you are anymore, and the Bitcoin is dwindling, and things started getting much rougher, and
the real world.
Yeah, so this is the real world, and it wasn't something that it was like hit me like a train. Like I knew it was coming. I knew that, you know, the way I was living wasn't sustainable, and I started to get discouraged, both in filmmaking, working, you know, in an art school environment. As always, you know, there's a million things to say about that, and you know, I've always been working on projects and doing internships throughout school. You know, I always did stuff. It was never like a, you know, in AA they talk about rock bottom. It was never like I was just like losing it on the floor. But I was definitely hedonistic and started losing my values and losing my confidence. And I think when this was really stirring up, Junior Ruckus, our nonprofit, was, you know, sort of hit a lull, pretty stagnant. My best friend Keita, who I started Junior Ruckus with, he had some family issues. Things weren't looking too good. Nanome, which was his full-time project at the time, was, you know, struggling a bit. They were trying to find seed, and just it really seemed like things were going nowhere.
Yeah.
I was not excited in my day-to-day. I'd just come back from being in Paris. This is a year and a half ago, or just 2 years ago, and just come back from being in Paris and being effectively broke. But, you know, studying literature and enjoying it, but, you know, planning out my meals. And I was back in New York, and I was living in this, essentially a frat house, and I wasn't loving life. I was still doing things, but it just wasn't fun anymore. And I was in this business class. This was called Digital Business Strategies. It was a great class at NYU. It's a 2-credit class. If you're at NYU, I recommend you take it. It's like 200 business students, NYU Stern Business School students, who are like apparently the tip top. With all due respect, I guess these guys are the best. I don't know. I don't know. And
La crème de la crème.
Yeah. And me and my actor friend, Julian, were sitting in this class. We just needed to get the credits. It sounded interesting. We were enjoying the class, and LinkedIn came up, and the professor asked who uses LinkedIn, and immediately all the hands shot up.
Except
us,
students.
except 2 students. And I'm looking around at these kids, and I'm like, you fucking nerds. Like, and mind you, at the time, so I quit social media right when I started college. I almost completely quit social media. I just really restarted using Twitter again, but I don't have anything else. So at the time, all these kids are advocating LinkedIn. And I'm like, what? Like, LinkedIn is the corniest, tackiest thing ever, because when I look at someone's LinkedIn profile, I'm like, nobody is like that. Like, people are people. People are not dates and management systems and skills, you know? I always found LinkedIn so hilarious. But these kids are like, dude, you gotta have LinkedIn, you know, LinkedIn's everything. So I go home that night, and I spitefully create a LinkedIn, and I hope there's some screenshots of it somewhere. It was this LinkedIn, it was written in the second person, meaning it was like, you blah, blah, blah. So it was describing my career path. And it was really cynical and hateful. It was hilarious. I'm very proud of it. And I listed out all the internships I had done, all the projects I had worked on, my schooling, my education. And I'm making this thing, and I'm down in the dumps still. I'm doing this from a very hateful place. And I started looking at it, I'm essentially writing out my resume for the first time. And I'm like, wow, this isn't so bad. Like, it looks like I'm on a good path here. And it really just went to show, and how true it is. What gets measured gets managed. And removing social media from my life at the time had done so many good things, but the one role I think social media played so well in my life, and I think it does for so many people, is working as a journal, sort of a log, a way to measure your own life in a very positive way, usually because you want to display it to other people. So building that LinkedIn was so exciting for me because I was like, oh, wait a minute, like, I'm doing all right. And then you get to go and compare yourself to other people. I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. Like, it was very exciting.
It worked.
And I continue to use LinkedIn in addition to all the great features. Like, I guess people message me on LinkedIn, but like, the main focus of LinkedIn for me is I get to go in every time there's a little shift in my career, perhaps a new job title, new project, I get to go in and log it, and then I get to go back and look at everything I've done so far and have some sense of pride. And I think a lot of millennials like myself are so hard on themselves, and really checking in and patting yourself on the back. That's the role LinkedIn plays in my life, and that really got me out of, I think, there's a bunch of things, but LinkedIn really helped sort of shift me back onto a driven, focused career track about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely something to be said about taking breaks and recognizing what you're doing. I mean, we're living in a hypersensitive, super judgmental social media world, and it can easily bog you down. So just taking that time to recognize like what you've accomplished and have that be your fuel to keep going is really important.
Yeah, and I also think when I was in high school, I had family and friends and all these people patting me on the back all the time. And that helped me know what I was doing was good. And this is such a millennial thing, and people would, I'm sure, are going to hear this and think that's ridiculous, but you need that. Yeah. You need that to get things done. And I think previous generations learned to pat themselves on the back.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But we didn't learn that. And that's because you adults were too busy giving us trophies and whatnot. So, but
good
now
job, son.
Yeah. But now I'm learning to do that for myself, and it's helping out so much. Yeah. But I didn't get that when you go to college, right? Your professors don't give a shit. Your friends aren't patting. Everybody's, especially when you go to art school, everybody's edging up against each other. Right. But now I'm learning to change that game up. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you were starting out, how did you know to capitalize on what was available to you?
All right, so I've described myself as sort of a chronic intern. And it's funny because internships now, I think, are kind of held in low esteem, at least among the art students in my peer group. Internships are always this thing you apply for, it's this long process, and then you go and you do slave labor for someone. That's generally the perspective a lot of people have. For me, internships have been sort of the greatest resource of my life. And it's because I've never applied to an internship at NBC or ABC or Deloitte or Goldman Sachs. I've always applied for the big fish in the smaller ponds. I've never actually applied, now that I think about it. When I was 12, knowing that I had an interest in film, a friend's parents said, hey, there's this really cool production company, you should see if you can work for them. So we sent an email. I think my mom and I sat down and we sent an email like, hey, I'm interested in working with you, James Serino, who owns Connect Productions, and we CC'd our friend Eric Rosso, who's a great guy I want to give a shout out to, but CC'd him, said, I'm a young filmmaker, I'd like to follow him. He said, sure, why not? So for essentially 3 summers, from the time I was 12 to 15, I got to be in a full-time, dedicated, profitable, and good production environment and learn everything from so many people. And that sort of laid out, I got very lucky, that laid out that's how I thought an internship should go. Yeah. And it laid out the standard for me, at Kinetic Productions is where I developed that direct-to-customer distribution system. But that sort of set a standard for me as far as what to expect from an internship and what an internship should really be. So
talking about the difference between our generation and the one prior, like that's one thing they stopped doing that I thought was so valuable, was apprenticeship.
Right.
Like, that doesn't happen anymore. Now, like, the intern is kind of
the intern is the slave.
Yeah. Like, go get us coffee and you're not going to be given interesting work, and it's like you have to earn your keep. But having that direct contact with a mentor, tell us about like that.
Yeah. So, well, one thing on that note, I would really recommend check out at least New York State's, and I'm sure other states have internship laws, and they actually qualify what an internship should be, and it should be the intern's getting valuable experience, and the intern's not getting paid, but the intern is really getting a lot from this, and it's very explicit. I think it's a great document, so I would recommend checking that out.
Yeah, don't let yourself get taken advantage of.
Yeah, and so many kids do. I've done it before, but most internships I've had have effectively been mentorships. Never formally. It's never been like, hey, will you be my mentor? I haven't done that. I hope to maybe do that someday. But it's always been like, I'm going to follow someone who's good at what they do, and I'm going to learn everything they have to teach. So I did that with James Serino, who was nominated for and I think won a BAFTA in 2006, which is the British Academy Awards. That was incredible. He taught me so much. And then when I got to college, I emailed a company called Immersion, which is a music video production company based in Brooklyn. They've since moved to LA, or they're kind of bi-coastal now. But they did music videos I really liked. And I knew they were small enough, it wasn't Joseph Kahn or some huge music video director. They were small enough that I actually had a chance to meet them. And just a shot in the dark, I said, hey, do you guys want to intern? And they said, sure. And all of a sudden, I got to work on these huge music videos, at least from my perspective. And I got to work directly under Yasha Grubin and Roxy, his girlfriend at the time, and work on some amazing projects and really feel valued in the company.
You can't underestimate the power of just sending the email. In banking, it's so classic where people have come up with really creative ways to stand out because everyone is willing to email day after day. Yeah. But most other people, that doesn't apply. Like, take the chance, email the person, Don't just convince yourself that they're going to say no right off the bat.
Right, exactly. That you really have nothing to lose. And really find, I consider myself a pragmatist, and unknowingly in this sort of internship strategy I developed, I was very, very pragmatic in the sense that I would never reach out to someone, of course, that was massive. Maybe sometimes I'd send an email, but I wouldn't expect much. But I knew that the maximum value I could squeeze out of from whatever opportunity was available to me was the biggest fish in my pond. I can probably reach out to.
Yes.
And I always did that. So with Immersion, now they're huge. They do, Gucci Mane videos, Kehlani videos, huge names, Little Uzi Vert. But, they're still accessible. And reaching out to them was such a good decision. I learned so much. And then later, I wanted to work in blockchain a couple years later. So this was, I guess, last year. Wanted to work in blockchain. I knew I probably wasn't going to be able to work under Vitalik. I didn't have the technical skills. Vitalik is the creator of Ethereum, for those listening. But I figured, there's probably some blockchain startups around here that are good. And I looked at a few, and MediaChain came along, which is a company that has since been acquired by Spotify, which is a huge deal. MediaChain was just a few guys in a warehouse in Brooklyn doing really good quality work. And I worked for them for about 6 months and did research and helped design product and just got to listen in on so many great conversations. I mean, I was so inspired working there. CEO and COO, respectively, Dennis Nazarov and Jesse Walden are two, the biggest influencers in the way I think, and two of my biggest inspirations. And now they're working at Spotify developing product. They're a blockchain startup. I'll say this, we were working on a token sale before they got acquired. I don't know what else that means, but I'm sure you guys can deduce that there's probably some very exciting things going on at Spotify.
Yeah. I want to touch on something you said there for a second. So Chris Sacca, who is now running like one of the most successful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, was talking about how getting involved was his signature move. Like, he would go into the higher ups meeting, just show up. He's not invited, right? Yeah. He just shows up, and he's always wearing this checkered cowboy shirt, which he became really known for. So he had like this signature brand, and he's coming in, and people are like, "What the hell are you doing here?" Yeah. And he's just like, "Oh, I'm here to take notes. Yeah. I'm gonna take notes for you guys." And they just look away, and there he is, like in the freaking executives meeting, learning, like some intern boy. He could do that.
There's a David Foster Wallace piece called "Another Example of the Porousness of Certain Borders," which I think is such a great phrase because there really are some very thin walls to some very important and exciting things going on in the world around you, and you just have to know where to look. It's everywhere, and you've got nothing to lose. The risk is so low.
It's so low. Like, worst case scenario, you get kicked out of a meeting, or somebody's just sends you back to what you were doing at square one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's sort of how my chronic intern strategy worked, and it's paid off huge. I mean, I've gotten to work in some amazing companies every single company that I've worked at, that I've strategically chosen, has really grown substantially since I left or since I was with them. And that's something that not a lot of people can say for jobs. but let alone an internship. But other resources that I've utilized that have been really accessible to me and really helpful is having a Kindle. Obviously, reading books is an incredibly powerful tool. Just about anyone who's achieved anything will tell you that. From a young age, when I couldn't buy things, book piracy and then open free books, like the Gutenberg Project. There's so much great information available that you can send to a Kindle. A Kindle's like an $80 investment, and it's probably the most valuable asset you have besides your brain. So I'd recommend that. Tim Ferriss show, obviously, everything Tim Ferriss does, I think, is fantastic.
Autumn and I are like super Tim Ferriss fans.
Yeah.
We connected on that early on.
Yeah.
I want to talk about books for a second. So I hated reading until I think like 2 years ago, which is very recent. And I didn't realize, I think it's because I had been so turned off by books in school, because when you're forced to read things you don't like, you just get turned off. And then I had a very good friend of mine named Raphael tell me, you don't understand how much you're missing out on.
Yeah.
Right? And I didn't compute that in the way that other people had told me until he said it. And then I started reading, and it completely changed everything. It's like having the access to literally anything. Any knowledge you could possibly want.
Yeah. Reading in schools, it's so tough because I used to love to read. I was one of those voracious reader kids who would tear down books. And I remember until about 6th grade, you could choose what books you wanted to do your book report on. So I'd have so many to choose from because there were so many I wanted to. And then after that, it's like, okay, let's educate you on the classics. And immediately, all the fun is sucked out of reading, especially now that we have Spark Notes and whatnot available to us. There's no real incentive to read in high school. And of course, that's damaging. I think I was 16 or 15 years old. I started reading again. I picked up some very accessible Hunter S. Thompson and whatnot, and then I plunged right back in. And it's such a good muscle to have. Yeah. And
so where do you think this desire to join tech entrepreneurship stem from?
Well, I think it's not so much. I think anybody has a desire to get involved in something exciting and cool, but the actual confidence and drive to do it is very hard to maintain.
Yeah.
And that kind of stokes the desire and vice versa. So I always tell people, I got very lucky because I believe everybody has some sort of muscle and talent from day one. Mine just happened to be I was good at traditional metrics, test scores, SATs, general academics. They were very easy to me. And there's a lot of students who are like that, and there's a lot of people who aren't like that. Unfortunately, those are the metrics that people recognize in this world, or at least in the United States. And that really built my confidence, getting recognized for the things I was doing well. But I remember so many of my peers would be jealous or upset. And I would see they were doing other things well. It's just that those aren't the things that people are going to recognize, that your elders are going to recognize. But I was a very confident, tween and teenager. And that led me to dive headfirst into entrepreneurship and start Junior Ruckus at the time. And I was super arrogant, actually. It was beyond confidence, but that's sort of a very common, unfortunately, thing in entrepreneurs.
It's almost
and
necessary.
Founders is you need to be a little bit delusional to get started. Yeah. But the one thing I think that's most important about that is finding your muscle. From a very young age, I knew my muscle was language, that I could read well, understand what I was reading, and write well and communicate things effectively. And I think I'm so grateful to have that skill and to be able to continue to work on it. And language is sort of the gateway to almost everything. I consider language as sort of the human interface to the world. Pretty much anything you want to interact with, anybody else you want to interact with, you interact through language. It's sort of the first barrier. It's the first medium of exchange between people. And if you can master that, you can master a whole lot. And it also happens to be sort of the main tool of the trade in traditional academics, and that was the muscle I got recognized for. But other people who might not feel so confident in a traditional academic setting or a language setting, know what you're good at and flex your muscle. Know your muscle, flex your muscle, work your muscle. Don't worry about anything else. Yeah.
If only everyone was recognized for their actual talent.
Yeah, and that's something hopefully the Matryx platform will will do is help people get recognized for what they're good at.
Yeah. That part of Matryx is super, super cool. And the fact that everyone is going to get their share, no one is discouraged from not contributing. Yeah. What were the tools or resources you used that helped you when getting started?
So I thought about this question quite a bit, and there's so many tools, and I can list them all out, but I don't think there's anything particularly esoteric or that needs to be mentioned. It's most common software tools. But one strategy I've always had inadvertently in learning to use technical software tools for everything from websites to design software to video editing is to go in, do things the professional and hard way first for a little bit, set a time limit, a few hours, a few days, so then you can go and use the easier, simpler, consumer-based tools for non-professionals, and you can use them more effectively. So for example, a friend of mine, Holden Jaff, was I think 17 years old. He's in a band called Del Water Gap now, and now they're trending on Spotify and whatnot. But he had released his first EP. It was a solo project, and he wanted to create a website. And I was like, sure, I'll make your website. I have zero web experience, like zero, literally zero. But I knew what HTML was, and I had a little bit of code experience. So I looked at some other websites, and I typed up this thing. I torrented Dreamweaver. I made this like really sloppy back end, but it was kind of a pretty front end minimalist website. And I put it up, and it worked great for him for a couple of years, and then he collaborated with a young lady named Maggie Rogers, who just got signed by Pharrell. I mean, it was one of these funny projects. Maggie Rogers' website, mind you, for a while was a really shitty Dreamweaver site designed by me for like all of like 6 months, and so was Del Water Gaps. But anyways, so I did that for a while. It was like toy around in Dreamweaver. It was a complete disaster. And now I use Squarespace. Now I use Squarespace and WordPress. Two very easy, accessible tools, but I'm able to use them very, very effectively because I know why they're simple and why they're better than the other ways, and I know what to take advantage of. And it's the same thing. I got into filmmaking because of Adobe After Effects. So I wanted to create special effects. So I'd make these little 1-minute videos where I'm either cloned or shooting fireballs, and I would do it really poorly. But if you can use After Effects, you can use just about everything else in the Adobe Creative Suite, from Photoshop to Premiere to Dreamweaver even. It's all in there. That's probably the most complex tool in that suite. And in using After Effects poorly for a couple days or weeks, I was able to approach all the other tools much more effectively.
Yeah. So Richard Feynman, who is a role model of Tim Ferriss as well, and since that I got really into him. I'll put a link in the show notes to a documentary that's really good about him. He talks about knowing the name of something versus knowing something. And that's exactly what you're talking about, in that there's so many people who can name or have some surface knowledge about X, but if they really get to know that thing, they can easily decipher it, dissect it, apply it to different mediums, different things, and that putting in the work to do that in the first place is so much more worth it.
Yeah, and then learning to do things the right way, so you can do them the wrong way later, do them the easy way. Learning the rules so you can break them. It really works. It's worked for me.
So this brings to mind, back when I was working as a bartender, I was with this Portuguese bartender. His name is Diego. He would like me to pronounce his name that way.
Okay.
And he told me this proverb that I'm blanking on, but it basically said that the lazy man works double the time. And I think that applies so well here. So in our case, we would just be lazy at the bar, and we'd have to end up like cutting limes during peak hour, and we'd be screwed. Whereas if you front load, everything else is smooth.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm gonna put that in my back pocket. Lazy bird works twice for the worm, presumably.
Yeah, you have to get that worm, man. What was the most surprising thing to you when you were getting started?
So getting started in general, I think actually it all applies to everything. Just getting started in tech entrepreneurship and generally going out and forging my own path with things is that you quickly realize no one has any clue what they're doing. And like, I've had so many mentors that I've learned so much from, and then a couple years later reflected and looked back and been like, that guy was really winging it. Like, he had no idea. And that's so empowering. So like at first,
it's possible.
So I think when you hear that no one knows what they're doing, that's a sort of common adage in today's age. I think it's like really sort of nihilistic and like discouraging, but then when you actually see it in action, it's extremely liberating. The difference between the people who are successful and the people who are failing, I mean, this is a very broad generalization, is that the people who are successful have no fucking clue what they're doing, but they're doing something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's something to be said for the ignorance of getting started.
Yeah. Exactly. I love that. That's a great word. The ignorance of getting started. That sounds like some literature. Yeah. So realizing no one knows what they're doing, that's been super surprising. And I guess another surprising thing is how important it is to sort of gauge failure, what failure really means to you.
Yes.
Tim Ferriss has a thing called fear setting. There's all sorts of forms of this, but you really got to sort of outline what it means to fail and be willing to do it. And that'd be sort of my advice to young entrepreneurs as well, is recognize, okay, how bad are you willing to fail and what exactly does that look like? You know, everything you put effort into, really, and you do things thoughtfully with like good ethical intentions at heart, it's going to be positive sum at the end of the day. So what may look like a monetary failure, assuming it doesn't financially wreck you, is generally going to be positive sum. It's going to have a positive outcome. So really outlining those things at first has been so effective for me, and it's something I learned to do. I think most projects I've worked on prior to the age of 20 have been by some metric of failure. Some metric that I would have predefined for myself as a failure. You know, this video didn't get 10 million views on YouTube, it's a failure. But you know, obviously there's a positive outcome. So that's another surprising thing about getting started. And then another thing that's been really valuable to me, I think Tim Ferriss calls it practicing poverty.
Yes. We're going to link to both the Tim Ferriss's TED Talk on fear setting and the Stoic passage on practicing poverty in the show notes.
It's a funny thing. I mean, I'm fortunate to come from a background where I've always had enough. I know people, you know, some of my close friends haven't always, and I've witnessed that, and it made me feel worse because as I entered college and whatnot, I managed to get myself totally broke. I've been in, you know, $5,000 to $10,000 in credit card debt. Additionally, I have student debt right now, but you know, there's been times in my life living in Paris and living in Prague while studying abroad, take on massive debt to study abroad, and then literally having to schedule out my meals and ration and, you know, hop the turnstiles and stuff. And I've lived, you know, for 4 months or 6 months on end, essentially broke, having a roof over my head, but not having any buying power whatsoever, and really feeling like the debt I was in was insurmountable. This is like even a year and a half ago, I've been in that situation, and you know, now today I pay my rent, I'm out of credit card debt, I've got a lot of things going on, and I know I'm not afraid to take on debt now. I'm not afraid to take bigger risks because I know the worst case scenario is that I'm gonna have to like ration out a banh mi over 2 days, and I can survive.
So like in the shortest amount of time that we can explain this, practicing poverty is basically getting yourself very familiar with the visceral feelings, or just living in the way that you would if your worst case scenario were to happen. And I think like what that does is, first of all, it makes risky decisions very easy to take because you know worst case scenario you're going to be fine.
Right.
But also it lets you know that in those worst case scenarios it's going to pass. You know, the storm will eventually pass, and it's very difficult to see the solution normally when you're in the thick of a problem, but having that hindsight and knowing that you've been through it before allows you to feel comfortable knowing you're going to get through it.
Right.
So you now have a team of 10 full-time developers and 20 people working for you.
Well, I think that's a bit of exaggeration. Nanome itself has 10 full-time developers.
Right. Yeah. Nanome has that.
Yeah. I work for Nanome, but I'm the CEO of our subsidiary company, Matryx, and right now it's pretty wild. I guess I'm the main point of contact for about a team of about 20 contractors or so, which is really, really wild.
Yeah. So there's so much stuff I want to dive into this. Autumn is 21 years old, okay? So there's a couple very interesting things that start to happen when you're young and you're working with people that are much older, much more experienced.
Great.
And I want to dive into that.
So there's so many places to start. I'm the project manager for a very big project that's already generated over $1 million in revenue looking like several million more. It's terrifying. And I just started doing this about 3 months ago. And one of the weirdest things, and the most uncomfortable thing was, I felt, I had earned my position. My CEO, Steve, had chosen me to do this, but I felt so guilty for being 21 years old and, signing 6-figure deals with contractors and consultancy firms to work with and effectively for me for our project. And I was so scared of imposing my own working style and being in charge of them. And I like to consider myself a natural leader. I'm very comfortable leading, but the thought of telling people what to do when you know they have way more experience with you and they're going to pay more than you.
Yeah.
And it's a very terrifying thing, and I got very scared of imposing my own working style. And there was a period I was in Grand Cayman for a month with a team of like 12 consultants, and there were these crazy guys. They're really talented, the team from Storage, who were working round the clock, like 12 to 15-hour days, working their ass off. That's not my style. I respect them, but I like to, I know I make my most effective decisions and generate the most effective content for my company when I take, a 4-hour deep work period, and then I rest, and maybe another 2-3 hours in a day. The most I'm going to get out of a day is, the very max I'm going to get out of a day is 10 hours of focused work, and it's more realistically 6 or 7. But I was so scared of saying, hey, I'm not going to be on Slack all the time. I'm not going to be on email all the time. Don't contact me. I was so scared of asserting these things and imposing my own work style. I ended up just spazzing out and being accessible at all times for weeks on end, and effectively
and hurting the company.
Yeah, and hurting the company, and not being as effective as I could.
Right.
So recently, things have changed, and we've signed on more contractors and stuff, and I finally have said, I decided to take a risk and try, a few weeks ago, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna do what I would like to do, and then not be on Slack for a couple hours, and then, actually, what happened was I was sick. I went into the ICU. I was vomiting up blood because I had torn my throat through extended damage to my throat, abnormality in my gag reflex. I lost half the blood in my body. I was in the ICU, completely incapacitated for 3 days. And I realized when I was gone that ignoring all the messages and whatnot, and I hadn't even told my company, it was over a weekend, so I hadn't told my company, like, hey guys.
I'm not doing too good.
Yeah. I was like, all of these things can wait. So I was like, okay, when I recovered, I was like, I'll try this again. Like, I'll actually set the phone off for 10 hours or 8 hours, and I'll work and generate content, and then I'll report back. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, my output is so much higher. So now I'm learning to assert my working style, know what I'm good at doing, and in setting that example, the people that are working for me, which I really consider working with me, are able to work most effectively themselves and not feel obliged to, be constant. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I started implementing systems that sort of removed me from the flow of information, and I think my personal output's much higher, and what I've observed is the output on the project's much higher for a lot of people.
Tim Ferriss talks about this as well. I love it, where he would purposefully, I think every 2 months or so, leave whatever company he's in or whatever work he's doing, 0 contact with the team, but put some systems in place beforehand to test them. Mm-hmm. And what he'd find is, upon returning, instead of finding every fires going off everywhere and having to extinguish all the problems that have arose, he 10x the output of his team and his own.
Right.
And I love that. And I love also, Derek Sivers wrote a book called Anything You Want.
Yeah, I got to read that.
It's so good.
Okay.
And so he talks like exactly what you're going through, where he realized, this is my company. Like, I get to build it the way that I want to build it. And that's not something like you usually think, because you come into entrepreneurship learning from other people. So you're like, okay, well, we have to make it work for X, Y, and Z, instead of like, this is a unique opportunity for you to create something that works the way you want it to.
Right, exactly. And it's still something I'm learning and trying to do more effective. And I realize the more I do it, the more effective I am. And another sort of removing the bottleneck is, I've worked with a bunch of people over the past few years, and 95% of them were great. I've been fortunate. But there's some people who are losers, some people who aren't, and there's sort of three things that I look for now. It's general competence. A graduate student at NYU, Tish, told me this, was that I'm surprised how far being nice and competent can go. And I think there's a third element to that. So I'll only work with people who are nice people. Mean people fail. There's a great, I think, a Y Combinator article called Mean People Fail. General level of competence, your ability to get things done as you say you will. And then there's a third thing, and it's a willingness to learn. And I think that's so important, especially in tech entrepreneurship, is when new information and new technologies are being thrown at you, new ideas, you have to have a willingness to learn. And in a lot of industries, you can be nice and competent, and things will continue to operate. But you also, I think, for me, it's important that my team members are willing to try new things, and that I'm willing to try new things. And sometimes I'm not a person who's demonstrating all three of those qualities, and having the emotional intelligence to recognize when I'm not being that person is very important. And likewise, if I see someone on my team, someone I'm working with who's not demonstrating all three of those qualities, I'm not going to fire them or whatnot, but I'm not going to bother trying to manage them because I know it's going to be a diminishing return. It's much better to focus on the people who have those qualities, and it's been working out thus far.
That leads perfectly into the next question I want to ask you, which is how you find these people. How do you find type A top performers?
Well, fortunately, my officers at Nanome have networked with a great bunch of consultancy firms. Most of them have done really great work, and that's just been by looking at their track records and whatnot. But I would say in my more personal network, in the sense that the people I'm working directly with at Nanome, being Steve McCloskey, Keita, Edgardo Leja, who I would definitely consider type A performers, and the people that I really keep around in my close friend group who are not in tech entrepreneurship, but I would still consider really people who cultivate quality. I look for do they cultivate quality in what they do, and it doesn't matter what they're doing, but how I think Marcelo Gracie said, or somebody said, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I look for that in people, and that's what helps me sort of gauge whether or not I want this person in my life. Is if they try to cultivate a sense of quality in everything they do, everything from their posture to how they manage tasks on their computer, because it's really that simple. And there are a lot of people who really actively generate quality content, generate quality value. And quality is a sort of nebulous term, but I think quality, I think Robert Pirsig defined quality as a perceptual experience. And quality when you see it, but it's very difficult to qualify.
No, I like that. But it's clear. Yeah. I like that very much. It's like there's no debating. It's very evident. This is a piece of quality work.
Yeah. So just look for quality and you'll find quality people, I think.
So Mark Zuckerberg has a hiring rule that I really like, where he says, be strong enough and self-confident enough to only hire people that are stronger than you. And what he means by that is, like, he wouldn't hire anyone that he wouldn't work for in an alternate universe.
That's great. That's a great quote. I wish I had known that, 2 years ago.
Yeah. Before building the team. Yeah. But it's like it really helps put in perspective, like, is this a good human being? Is this somebody that I respect? Is this somebody that can really do the work that I'm asking them to do? Is this someone that would take care of me the way that I want to take care of? It fills in all of those gaps.
Yeah, and I think the way I would phrase that, and sort of my philosophy, is because I guess technically I have people working for me, but I never consider it that. I wouldn't have someone work for me unless I could work with them as well.
Right, gotcha.
That's sort of how I think about it. Yeah, I think Mark Zuckerberg said it better, but unless I can see myself working with another person for the rest of my life, I generally won't work with them.
Right.
And I'm lucky to have a small, intimate team of people that I think I can work with for a very long time.
Yeah. No, it's awesome to have that skill. I think it's very easy to make poor hiring decisions, so giving that forethought in the beginning is paramount. What would you say is the most important thing you or the company invest time or money in that yields the highest amount of returns?
There's so many things and there's so many facets of the company. For my project specifically, Matryx, so we've sort of laid out the framework for everything, right? We have a website, we have the community. management. You know, we have the advertising, marketing set up, all that kind of stuff. Right now, it's kind of, you know, we're in the flow. Everything is just sort of turning around nicely. But so what I spend my time on now is generating thoughtful content, and that's generally writing medium blog posts, usually a few hundred words. That's what takes up a good, I'd say about half of my time. And
that's a lot.
Yeah. And these blog posts, they don't have huge readership, but they're a direct dialogue with our most intimate and important fans.
Yes.
Kevin Kelly talks about having 1,000 true fans or 100 true fans.
Yes.
Is so much more valuable than having 10x meh people. So with Matryx, we're one of the smaller token sales. We don't have, you know, 20,000 participants, but we do have 500 people who really, really give a shit.
Right.
And cultivating that relationship has really created the highest output for our company, and cultivating and focusing especially on the 10, you know, the 10 most important token purchasers, the 10 people who care the most. That has given the highest output, and the way we engage with them is, of course, through conversations on the phone and on Google Hangouts, but by writing really thoughtful content that explains exactly how we're thinking. That's extremely critical, and I think that, you know, holds up to a critical audience. And one of the ways we do that, or one of the ways I do that, is we post a lot of our content to Hacker News, which is news.ycombinator.com, and it's sort of like a very like minimalist Reddit, and everyone on it is our developers coming from a technical background.
They're the perfect recipients.
Yeah, and they're super critical. And if you post something on Hacker News and you get no response, that's generally a good thing, because 9 times out of 10 you're getting a very critical, but a thoughtful, not a hateful critical response, but a very, you know, sort of grounded critical response. And my goal always is, when I write a piece of content or we make a new decision, is like, okay, would Hacker News look at this and say it's a good one? And it's good to have that ideal audience member. So generating quality content for a quality audience as well.
Yes. And
seeing if it holds up. That's the most important thing I think I do in my role. And it's paid off.
So 2 things. One, what I love is, and we talk about this at Echo Studio as market immersion, which is really pinning down who is your ideal customer, who would be those 1,000 true fans, who would be those 100 true fans, and speaking to them.
Right.
Actually, like, getting out of wherever you are and having a conversation with those people. And the second thing is, and I've talked about this before, is Brian Chesky is the perfect example of this. During the early days of Airbnb, going to the early adopters' houses
and taking pictures,
and taking pictures for free, just to like speak to people that are using his product. And, you know, he's like this big CEO guy in Silicon Valley, coming in and knocking on people's doors like, hey, like, I made this app, can I stay with you? And they're telling him everything. They're telling him everything they like, everything they hate, everything that they want them to do in the future. So they're also making the product development later down the line for him. It's like so invaluable to just get out of your head and speak to the people who are using what you're making.
There's a great article called like Our Typical Founder Advice for Y Combinator. And when I just read it again last night, I try to read it every few weeks. One of the things he says is do things that don't scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's one of those things. Obviously, the CEO can't go to every Airbnb host's house and interact with them, but while you can, you should.
Exactly.
And that's something that I'm working on with Matryx right now, and I'm working on in my other ventures, is really trying to cultivate quality, super high input-output tasks while the scale is small.
It's so interesting to think that it may actually be much easier to get the right content out to the right people when you're small rather than when you're huge.
Right.
Because you don't get that direct contact that you would when you're at scale.
Right, exactly.
So talking about like writing, so you're a very, very good writer.
Oh, thank you.
You have amazing vernacular, like you communicate very well. There are a lot of ways to build an audience online that aren't necessarily writing, right? So like what we were talking about before, working that muscle, finding that muscle that you're really good at, you can be a podcaster, you can be a YouTube star. Like basically, you know, you need to audit your strengths, you need to figure out what is my muscle? Am I introverted and a good writer? In which case, write blog posts, right?
Yeah.
Are you extroverted and love talking to people? Go on YouTube.
Right.
you're introverted but you don't like videos, start a
You're
podcast.
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want anyone to get discouraged that owning an online business means you have to blog. You don't have to blog.
Right, and one of the things I personally love about writing is, I'm not a person, who has a huge audience online. When I was a teenager making films, I definitely had like this a small following in the hundreds that I cultivated as well, but it was doing too much for my ego and I had to put it down for a while. And now I'm just starting to build back up more of a following, and that means I have a few dozen followers on Medium. My Twitter's slowly building up again, and now I just looked the other day, I'm a top writer in virtual reality and crypto on Medium. And but one of the cool things about that is even though the following's small, and I'm not looking for a huge one, writing is one of those things, and especially if you're writing quality, it demands actually so much of your audience. It demands your audience to engage, and this is some of my favorite writers, like David Foster Wallace says, he wants to challenge the reader with his books. He wants the reader to have to engage, just feel like their brain's hurting. It's not supposed to be easy, and when they offer that level of engagement, it becomes mutual. And that's one of the few things, you can put a lot of thought and time into an Instagram post that people can engage with very easily. But it's not about making your content super digestible. It's about making it valuable to your audience.
Yes.
That's what that's sort of my philosophy. And in the coming year or two, in the time to come, I've really had time to think since I disabled social media, and I think about what I want to say and how I want to say it.
Oh man,
and
that's so good.
I'm much more comfortable now returning to social media and just returning to Twitter and posting on Medium actively. I'm much more comfortable posting things and comfortable in my strategy, which is I'm going to generate quality content for myself and for a few people in that circle, and I know that every single person who follows me right now really cares and is really reading my stuff, and that is so much more valuable, so much more valuable than whatever it was I had before, which was 300 people liking my photos and not giving a shit about what I had to say or what I had to share.
Kind of interesting at how today people desperately want to be heard and therefore speak more than they need to, whereas in the past the value was placed on people who considered thought, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think Thomas Jefferson was the guy who said, never say in 2 words what could be said in 1.
Right.
Yeah. It's ironic to see the people who want to be heard the most speak the most and don't get heard.
Yeah. Yeah, so feeling, the value you derive from an audience on social media is really the value of feeling actually listened to. It's not about how many people hear you, but how many people listen. How many people hear the signal and not the noise. And that's something it took me a while to learn, but now I'm very happy to come back with that philosophy.
Right. So talk about growing a following with social media. We just outlined all of the ways that people are doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And we can dive in now, because it ties in perfectly with social media, how to get people engaged and then later grow that audience.
Right. So right now for Matryx, I think we have a community of about 500 people to 1,000 people on Twitter and Telegram, which are direct channels, and then we have a few hundred people following us on Medium.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize these are true fans.
Yeah,
these are not just like your average follower who likes because he's a friend or whatever. These are people who genuinely give a shit about the content.
Right. So, I mean, by creating quality content on Medium, we get these incredible conversations on Telegram and Twitter. People reach out to us on email and really tell us what they think, and that's like the best market research we could do. And we see a lot of times, another thing we've been doing, I think has been really effective, we'll see a lot of criticism on Reddit or Twitter or something, someone perhaps completely railing into our project, and then sometimes on an emotional or kind of hateful level, and we'll respond with like a very thoughtful Medium post about where they could be right and where they're wrong, and what we think, and hey, what do other people think? And it's paid off very well. And sometimes we've made mistakes and other people have recognized them, and being comfortable acknowledging that and really establishing that dialogue has been super effective for us as a company.
I've found that the Reddit community is the most daunting but useful feedback tool there is.
Right. I mean, Reddit is crazy, and it's so wild. The other day I posted a blog article I wrote about mental health to r/hip hop heads. It was about a song, a song about suicide.
I read this,
and it was I thought I had an unpopular opinion about the song, and I posted it to Reddit. I literally forgot I posted it to Reddit. I posted Reddit like in the morning on my phone. I came into the office, and it had like 20,000 views and 600 comments, and it was because people were. I think actually most people are agreeing with me, but the people who commented hated it.
Yeah.
And it was wild. That was probably the first thing I've ever posted on Reddit that's gotten that.
They're the king of controversy like that. I love it.
Yeah. But Reddit is super fun. And then another thing about this, like having the true fans, you know, we're both fans of Tim Ferriss, and we're both big fans of Tim Ferriss. And one thing that we talked about earlier is there are no casual fans of Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a casual fan.
And that hopefully there will be no casual Matrix fans.
Yeah. I think, and you know, like I was thinking about it yesterday as well, the added benefit of that is that it allows people like us to connect so quickly just because we have that mega fandom.
It's not a superficial interest.
Yeah.
It's a real interest.
Right. And that says so much about a person, and it allows you to just make connections. So you want to network with people, become a mega fan of something, and then find the people who are the same mega fan.
That's a great strategy. Yeah, that's really good.
So there's something to be said for starting your own category. Now, in marketing, there's a book. It's called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and this law is the law of category. Mm-hmm. Tim Ferriss did it by owning the term lifestyle design, and I think Matryx is doing it in science STEM collaboration.
Right. It's a kind of a new thing, I guess.
Yeah, it totally is. And the benefits of that, which I find interesting, I want to share with people, is just because there's competition in a market does not mean you have no hope in being towards the top one day. You just need to set a niche, set a little subset of that category, and be the first to own it.
Right. There's so many things I want to say about that, especially with Matryx, because we were trying to figure out how to message Matryx to a mainstream audience for a long time. And there's so many facets, you know, with Matryx, there's one component of it, and it's kind of our go-to-market, is this 3D asset library. It's a decentralized 3D asset library. There's a lot of competition in that market, not just in 3D asset libraries, but in decentralized ones as well. There's I think, AR token, and there's Decentraland, there's all these other things. And we were trying to say, okay, we're this decentralized 3D asset library, and we also have this bounty system for competition. Eventually, we figured out, okay, forget the 3D asset. That's part of what we do. But if you distill it down to its core, Matryx is this platform for collaboration, and there's absolutely no competition there.
Yeah.
We're encountering competition in lots of other things we do, and lots of extrapolations of the platform. But down to its core, there's nothing else.
Yes.
And if you have a good idea, generally, if you have a unique idea, you'll encounter competition, but if you can distill it down to its core, there really isn't competition.
Right.
If it's a good idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Talking about growing your following, I wanted to emphasize just quickly the importance of engagement. A lot of people get hard over quantity and the number of followers, and they don't realize that the quality of those followers is what's really important.
Right. There's really something to be said about that. I've just been working on some Instagram marketing for another project, and I was learning that people with 1,000 followers get 15% engagements on every post, meaning 15% of the people like it.
Which
people
is tiny.
But people with 1 million followers get like 1%.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because you might have 1 million followers, but you could be getting the same amount of engagements as someone with 10,000 because it dilutes. And that's because the intimacy of a smaller following, a smaller dedicated following, is infinitely more valuable than a superficial, massive following. It's such a funny thing because growing up, I think a lot of kids are going to grow up just wanting large followings on social media.
Exactly. This is why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, and it's really, really terrifying. I fortunately missed that. I was never subscribed to that idea. I liked the idea of having 300 to 500 people who really gave a shit.
Right.
But I have girls from my high school, millions of followers, I think, if not hundreds of thousands. What the hell do you do with that?
I have no idea. I don't know what
you advertise to them. That's the only thing you can do, right? You advertise our products to them.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Tim Ferriss summed this up super well, which I love. And he said, I'd rather make something that 10% of people love and rather than something that 50% of people like.
Right.
So relevant. How did you find the funding needed for the expenses that came with starting Matryx?
Okay, well here it goes. So Matryx is
we've opened Pandora's box.
Yeah. So Matryx is a subsidiary of Nanome. Nanome is run by Steve, Keita, Edgardo, all my officers, and I run, sort of de facto run Matryx, our subsidiary, and so our subsidiary contracts with our parent company, and Nanome, I wasn't too intimately involved in this. Nanome conducted some very traditional VC seed rounds in I think just around the $1 million range, maybe just under. They did it twice. They've been very successful. I've secured, an investment in the 5 figures, but nothing too special. But another thing we're doing, not as an investment platform, but as a revenue source for Matryx that will actually help fund the platform when it comes down to it, but it's not really an investment, is the token sale.
Yes.
And this is really what I've been doing for the past 6 months.
This is super, super cool.
Yeah, so just assuming no one knows what a token sale is, it's a crazy, nebulous, complex, earth-shattering idea, but it's very exciting. It's similar to an ICO. We call it a token sale because it's not quite. ICO really sounds like IPO, and it's not that. A token sale is a way of essentially selling tickets, selling the ability to participate in your blockchain platform. So the best analogy I have for it is like selling script to a carnival. Is it script or script? I think it's script. Selling
and the script would be the tickets
to
the
carnival. Tickets to the carnival. And those tickets are good for games or rides or shows, whatever. But the catch with a token sale, with the carnival metaphor, the blockchain platform that you build is essentially this endless magical expanse, this carnival ground that is infinitely scalable, that anybody can access. And what you do to develop it is you can build out the infrastructure. So you can build out the electricity, the sidewalks, the bathrooms, the water, the medical tents. And then what you can say is, hey, anybody can come and build a ride or a game on this carnival ground, except the only way they can exchange value, the only quote unquote currency or token they can use is this token that I created, this script. And what you can do is sell script to your carnival before there's rides on it. Or if you're really doing things the right way, which I like to think we are, is you go ahead and build a few rides on that carnival ground that you've built. Other people want to buy script from you because they want to ride your ride, and then value actually starts accumulating. And the value of those admission tickets go up. And then other people say, hey, I want to build a ride. I could really use that ground, and it's free. Yeah. So I'll go and do that, and of course I have to use the script if that's the one agreement that I have. And that's how the token sale model works. So what we do is that we've built out Matryx. We have a very minimal viable product. We have a marketplace you can go on right now. It's very much in its infancy, but people have seen the value in it and said, hey, I want to buy tokens. I want to buy script for this platform so I can use it. And, perhaps they'll go up in value if more value is brought to this platform. So that's what the token sale model is. You essentially set out a certain amount of coins, a certain amount of cryptocurrency, built on the Ethereum platform, and we can get very technical, but we'll keep it at a high level. We say there's going to be, I forget the number already. I think it's like 13 million coins or something. And these 13 million tokens, these tokens are worth this many Ethereum. They can be exchanged. We're going to mint these tokens. We make them ourselves. So if you send us Ethereum, we'll send you token. We're saving some of those tokens, not for ourselves, but for development of the platform. Mm-hmm. And we anticipate they'll be more valuable, and those can help bootstrap the platform and acquire users. But effectively, we have created our own little economy around collaboration.
I was about to say that. Yeah. Exactly.
And, we're still very much in our infancy. The token sale is still going on. Anybody around the world can participate, unless, of course, you're in China or it's Ukraine and your company has banned cryptocurrency. But anybody can participate.
So the simple-ish parallel that I want to make here, which makes what is actually being done very trivial. So don't fool yourselves into thinking this is what it is, because what's actually going down at Matryx is way more complex and interesting. But the best way I can illustrate is when online course creators make a course or want to pre-validate a course, they'll sell the idea of the course to people. This is called pre-selling, right? And people will pay to get into the course that hasn't been created yet because they're waiting for the resources to see if people would actually buy it before making it, and then using the funds from those pre-sales to actually film the course if it requires video lessons, hire the people that it needed to code a website, all of that. So basically, you crowdfund your own funding for an idea.
Right, and instead of like a traditional investment wherein your shareholders get to, tell you what to do and whatnot.
Right.
No, these are people just really pre-ordering a product that's still in production.
Right.
And it's much more exciting because your values are really aligned. Because when you build out a blockchain platform and you set aside a certain share of tokens for yourself, by the way, we haven't done this, but you could set aside, 10% of these tokens, 10% of the market cap of these tokens are for me. You could set that aside, and if you want those to go up in value, you got to make sure the value goes up for everyone, because that's everyone's store of value on the platform, and that's what makes blockchain so different. So people like to think about it in terms of investment, but it's really not that at all.
Everyone's in it together. The motivation is unanimous.
It's really community oriented, and it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Everybody matters.
Yeah, I love that. So it innately breeds a sense of collaboration instead of competition, which is super important. Talking about finding investors early on, founders worry about trading equity or power in their company in exchange for this advisory funding, right? I think there's something to be said for waiting for the right opportunity and not being too desperate early on, because you don't want to bring on, and this goes back to like what we were talking about with hiring, you don't want to work with anyone you can't imagine yourself working with for life. So unless that investor is that, you don't want to be trading.
Right, exactly. And I think, I wasn't very too involved in the seed rounds at Nanome. I helped create the pitch decks and whatnot. And I wish Steve, my CEO, was here to talk about it, but we're in a very cool position where we effectively get to choose our investors.
Right.
We're turning people down, and it's because we're not looking for money anymore. We know that our product is good. We know that there will always be people who want to throw money at it, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for real advisory roles, because the value someone brings to a company is usually a little bit of cash and a lot of good ideas, good decision making, and good experience. And we're lucky to be in that place. I don't work too intimately with our advisors, but the ones I do, I know why they're there, because they're fucking good at what they're doing.
Right.
And it's so exciting. And so when we talk about finding money for anything, and even for a film, I mean, probably the most money I've ever raised for a personal project of mine is somewhere in like the 5 to 10 grand range, right? It's always interesting to see, I've had different projects at different scales, but if your idea is any good, people are going to want to throw money at it.
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah.
People are looking to invest in projects right now.
I think that...
And if people aren't willing to throw money at your project, it's probably not a very good one.
Yes, and I think people are way more discouraged about looking... Like, I always get the question, like, how do I find investors? Dude, make something good, and people will come to you.
Right.
You're not, like, don't try to sell a bad product to anybody and expect them to throw money at you. Just make something good, and people will come to you.
Exactly. Yeah, and, if you're willing to put some of your cash into it, too, whatever you got, whatever's fair, then it might be worthwhile.
Yeah.
So many people I meet are like, I want to, start a seed round, but I'm not willing to put, 10 grand into my own thing. It's like, well, that's not going to reflect well, is it?
Yeah. It's and that brings to mind when doing web designers, I was reading this post about professional photography on your website, and it's like, if you have shitty design, if you have shitty photos, don't expect people to expect value from your business. Like, if you can't even afford to purchase $5 worth of stock photography, forget about getting any clients.
Right, exactly.
What advice would you give to your 18-year-old self? And could you give us some context about where you were and what you were doing at that time in your life?
So it's funny because the 18 is not that long ago. It was definitely a different time, though. I like to think that I'm not too changed. It's just very subtle changes from then. And I look back at any point in my life, and the advice I would almost always consistently give myself is read more and meditate more. And fortunately, I've practiced some forms of mindfulness or meditation since I was very young, because my mom did yoga and encouraged me to do so. Eventually, I was like prescribed yoga for my anxiety. My girlfriend is a yoga instructor, and she's a serious practitioner, so that's helped. And in the past like 4 or 5 years, I've meditated pretty regularly, and it's been super helpful. So reading, meditating, those are obvious ones, I think, and a lot of people in this entrepreneur space have really embraced that.
Yes.
But the one thing that I think made the biggest difference, and this goes back to the LinkedIn profile, and more recently, about 9 months ago when I was living in Prague, one thing I did that really helped shift me into a more positive space was measure. What gets measured gets managed. Measure whatever you can. It takes so little time. Sometimes it's kind of a pain in the ass to sit down for 15 minutes and type how much I slept last night, and and how long I meditated and what I accomplished today. But measuring tasks is so helpful, not just as a source of encouragement. I mean, primarily as a source of encouragement, but then there's so many other things. And I really just wish that when I was 15, 16, 17, I was documenting how I felt and things that were going on. And I did that through social media mainly, but because I don't like to reactivate my Facebook or whatnot, I have no other channel to view that whole story. And I want to say I haven't really brought this up yet, but sort of at the core of my personal philosophy, the core of everything I do, and really why I still consider myself a filmmaker, and filmmaking is so important to me, is the notion of narrative. There's a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. It's amazing about the monomyth, or essentially the common arc underneath all mythology in the world. And if anyone who's listening has studied narrative or is familiar with narrative, pretty much every story is the same. And so when I think about measurement and when I think about social media, it's all just storytelling. And if you can look back on your social media and see a good story, or if you can look back on your life and see a good story, it's going to help you continue to make that story better. And it's a question I ask myself often now that I measure things and kind of take notes and journals here and there. And when it comes to any major decision and I'm troubled or struggling, I ask myself, okay, how would the good story go? And it's usually like when I encounter failure, I'll say, okay, well, this is something, if I'm really familiar with the classic 3-act narrative, I encounter a failure, I'm like, okay, if this is a road of trials, if this is something that happened on my road of trials and I failed it, how does the rest of that story go? Yeah. What is the outcome? What is the lesson that's going to come up in the 3rd act somewhere down the line?
I love this idea. This is so good. Oh my God. Okay, so a couple things. So just to backtrack real quick, what gets managed is a quote from Peter Drucker, which is known to be basically the avatar of management. Basically, like, the idea is, if you're gonna get anywhere, you need to know what it looks like once you've arrived there, and what it looks like if you don't arrive there.
Right. And that so ties into storytelling and narrative.
Yes.
It's so, I could go like this, I could talk about this for hours, but I'd highly recommend everyone read Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces.
All of this will be in the show notes.
Yeah, or at least look up the monomyth, and you'll see it's essentially like, I think, an 11 or 13-step process. And you can, just about any movie in the world, you can match it step for step, like down to the minute. And it's really what the most effective thing I learned in film school. And it's crazy because it's all tied into human psychology. And then they say, I forget who said it, but effectively, if you want to access people or tell them something, you have to shape that something into the key shape of the story-shaped hole in our brains. That is how we communicate things, is through stories.
That's so good.
And I learned that's the most important thing I learned in film school, and I generally think that college is a fucking sham, it's a waste of money, but if that one thing was worth it.
Right.
And it's understanding narrative as a reflection or a mirror to the soul or whatever spiritual thing you want to think about, a mirror to the ego. It's a way for me to look at my life and say, how should this go? Because this is how the human brain works, and this is how the human brain deals with these sorts of things. There's a framework set out for it. So when you say, like, with the what's get measured gets managed, and knowing what success is going to look like, that ties directly into the hero's journey. The hero has a very explicit goal, right? And it's usually, and this ties back to failure that we were talking about earlier, but the hero usually wants to return with some sort of elixir. He wants to return with the princess or the sword, whatnot. And when you set off on a venture, an entrepreneurship venture, and you're like, I want this seed round, I want to create this product. And sometimes the hero doesn't come back with that, but he comes back with something else. But he recognizes he didn't come back with that, and there was still this second act, this whole journey in between
that he hasn't even been through yet.
Yeah, and there's where the answer is. And, whether you achieve your goal or not, you still went on the journey.
Right.
And being able to recognize the journey is a skill that I learned to recognize through film school. I learned through storytelling. And I want to bring that to so many other people's lives, this narrative.
This is a theme that has popped up with every single interview. The love of the journey and understanding that there's a bigger picture to everything, and your little failures that seem huge in the grand scheme of things are just a necessary part of that journey.
Right.
And learning to love that and push through it. And this is why I'm such a strong advocate for Stoicism as an entrepreneurial religion, is because it'll train you to see those as just little blips in your overall journey. And your hero's journey point really brings to mind Stephen Pressfield's Do the Work, also put in the show notes, because, the book is all about how to conquer resistance, and resistance in all its forms, whether it's starting a company, whether it's beating up drug addiction, all of these different resistances. And his point is, just like you were saying, you start off, you're gonna hit a wall. You're gonna feel like you failed. You're gonna wanna stop. That's like resistance block number one.
Yeah.
Then it's gonna happen again and again and again. And it's just a process of like becoming immune to that and just pushing through because you know it's gonna get better.
Yeah, and at some point something will shift, and that's a part in every narrative, is after you hit those 3 walls, okay, then you hit the big wall and something changes in your thinking. It's crazy. Look up The Hero's Journey. That's all I can say. It's so powerful.
If someone listening really wanted to start up their own tech-based business and you had the opportunity to mentor them for a 12-week period, what would you teach them first and why?
So the first thing I would say is I have no idea what I'm doing, because that's the most important thing I learned from all the people who mentored me effectively, is like, they didn't know what they were doing, but they were doing.
Yeah. Don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. And of course, I wouldn't choose myself as the tech mentor yet. I'd say give it a few more years.
Right.
We'll see if I get some exits under my belt or whatnot. But if I were to right now, I think it would to be, the first thing I would tell them is define your values, define the lifestyle you want, and define what success is and what failure is. We talked about it earlier in Tim Ferriss's not to-do list.
Yes.
One thing for me, this is my personal perspective, and I think I'm pretty confident in it, is don't work 80-hour weeks.
Yes.
Work as little as possible. Work as much as you need to, and not more than that.
That's it.
Be effective. Maintain a lifestyle. Let your business be a business. Don't let it be a lifestyle, because your lifestyle helps you cultivate your business, and your business helps you cultivate your lifestyle. And they are deeply integrated and intertwined, but they're not the same thing. And that's like such a terrible thing I've witnessed in so many of my peers and so many people in this space, is they recognize that the shit's intertwined, but they don't realize that it's not the same thing.
This is so good.
Yeah.
There's a perfect allegory that Casey Neistat was talking about on his vlog about relationships. So he's talking about like romantic relationships. And we'll put this video in the show notes as well. But he's talking about how if you were to imagine yourself being an oval, right? An oval piece of paper, and your, in this case, business being another oval piece of paper, most people will put this oval on top of the other oval and just stack them and be like, all right, well, this is me and my business and we're one and the same. And instead, he like separates them and creates this sort of Venn diagram, right? Where your oval overlaps with the business one, and then that thing that you share is
that's
your
what's really
business
special.
relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I love it. It's like have a
great
relationship with your business. Don't be your business.
Right. Exactly. I think that's a great metaphor for it. And try to have fun. That's the other thing I would say, and that's something I'm struggling with. I'm still learning to do. All my life, I've done everything for growth and self-development and challenge, and I had a very, the way my childhood was, I was very encouraged, but I was also, in a way, I felt everything I had to do was in the name of excellence. And I'm just learning now, I have to sit down and tell myself, put on the Oculus Rift and play a video game for 2 hours, watch a movie, and stop fucking looking for the plot holes and for the technical camera work and enjoy it. It's all these things I'm slowly learning to do now. I didn't grow up watching TV. I had a TV in my house, but I just never turn it on. Now I'm like, I gotta watch a TV show because it's fun. Right. I used to do drugs a lot, and it was fun, and I actually don't dismiss that. Fortunately, it's not sustainable for me. But finding, I've been, like, since I stopped, being a crazy college student, like, finding ways to have fun is hard if you haven't done it a lot. But when you do it, and I'm just figuring it out now, it benefits everything. And that's what I would definitely tell young startup people. And the startup thing will be fun. The tech entrepreneurship will be fun, but it's a different type of fun. There's also growth and whatnot tied to it. You have to also have fun that's not growth oriented, that's not detrimental or degenerate, but fun that's relaxing.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. I want to introduce the concept of play. And Tim Ferriss talks about this too, actually, where it's really important to find something that you can take easy and that you can just play with as you would as a kid. When you would play Legos, you weren't trying to like make the most effective city, right?
See, that was my problem, because as a kid I was trying to do
that. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying is like you have to learn to just enjoy the creative process, not take yourself too seriously. When you're overworked, do not keep pushing, because I've seen people who feel shame if they don't do it, and then that shame puts them in a deeper spiral, and they just keep working, and then eventually they burn out. And that's when things get very dangerous, because you could actually entirely quit this project that may have been something very cool and successful, but you took it too seriously.
And most projects die from suicide, not from murder.
Yes.
And
that's so good. I love that.
That's from a Y Combinator piece, but it's so true. It's something I had observed, and I think that was such a great way of phrasing it. I forget who wrote it, but every project that I've ever been on, anything that's failed has never been because somebody did it better, or because somebody stopped it in its tracks. It's because I fucked up, or because it didn't work out. I gave up, and that's so true. But going back to your earlier question, I think there's a few more things I'd like to list out. Is figure out who you want to work with, and really, do you want to work with them? Could you work with them for the rest of your life? We mentioned that. Could you work on this project for the rest of your life? And that doesn't mean like, hey, like, is this going to be my passion for the rest of my life? But it's like, is this a good project with good values at its heart? That's worthwhile, and even if it was a moderate success and it took up the rest of my life, would I feel good about it? And that's something I ask myself in everything I do, and now the answer is yes for everything I'm involved in, and it feels freaking good. So I would tell any young entrepreneur that, and then determine metrics.
Listen to yourself, big time.
Right. Listen. Am I enjoying this? And then determine metrics and goals for success, and more importantly, failure. And 9 times out of 10, you'll notice that a failure, there's certain metrics for every failure, but there's also the real failure underneath that would be to not learn anything, or to not get any growth out of a project. So even if something fails from an economic standpoint or from a product standpoint,
you learn something.
It's positive sum.
You can make it a win-win.
Right, exactly.
Set it up so that, if there's a skill that you want to learn, by trying it, you're innately winning because you've now learned that skill. And even if that skill doesn't translate to be the business project or whatever that it was meant to be, you still have that skill. So you've won. What was some bad advice you were given when getting started?
This is funny. You mentioned Casey Neistat earlier, and I think he says something along these lines. So, with all due respect to him, but a lot of people, when I was a young, really ambitious, arrogant 15, 16-year-old, people would always be like, see that energy, and they'd latch on to him and be like, yeah, just do it. Do it big. Like, just go for the home run. You got to hit it out of the park, man. And that's fucking unhealthy. And I would advise everyone against that. Do it. Maintain that energy. Harness that energy. But when you start thinking in this, I'm going to rule the world, I'm going to create the biggest product ever, I'm going to be Mark Zuckerberg, that's actually a drain of energy. That's not a way to create energy. That is just blasting your seed all over the place, and it's not a good way of doing things. Yeah,
and also it's fragile. It's vulnerable, because the second that ego cracks for the slightest big problem that puts a dent in it, you're gonna have to reevaluate why you started.
And there's something we talked about earlier, is there's that really young energy that I've had before, which is, I'm just gonna hit it out of the park. It's gonna be a home run. And then there's sort of the other end of the spectrum, which I've encountered when I was broke, which is, this isn't gonna work. Where you're so critical about your ideas and your projects that you're like, you really see every way they can fail. And that's sort of the pendulum of startup life, so to speak. And I really think now I'm beginning to harness the space in between,
right,
where you're just doing it. So I would change that advice, that to just do it and do it big, is just do it and do it well, and do it thoughtfully, and take your time, and then it'll get big. And be sure to do it. Do something.
Yeah, don't also get discouraged and don't act. Action is super important, and if it means like doing something shitty first, just in the spirit of getting started, then go for it.
Yeah. It's better to make the mistake than make nothing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. What do you think people are doing wrong when starting a tech software business or entrepreneuring within a company?
Well, I mean, I think this ties back to our last few points. I'm super lucky to work with a team that I really like. And that's really what it comes down to in all the partnerships I've witnessed and all the mentorships. What I've noticed in pretty much all the internships I've done and the successful projects I've been a part of is really valuable, good partnerships. Most of the time, those people are friends. But sometimes friends aren't the best people to work with. But I think most people, when starting a tech software business or any sort of business, is thinking just because someone's enthusiastic about the idea and believes in the idea or believes in the project, that doesn't mean they should. Is this someone you can work with for the rest of your life? Is this someone you can work effectively with? I'm grateful because my partner in just about every successful project I've had, his name's Keita Funakawa. I mentioned him earlier. He reached out to me when I was 14 years old to work on these PBS projects. He and I are good friends. We're best friends, arguably. But we're even better, we're better work partners because he's super energetic, crazy driven. I'm more likely to get discouraged. I'm a little more withheld. I'm a little more thinking at times, I'd like to say. But he calls me out. He nags me to take action, to get things done. And I call him out when he's out of line or needs to slow down or needs to, and that's a really healthy partnership. And so many of my friends witness us doing this, our mutual friends, and they think it's the funniest thing ever, but they also recognize that we work well together. It's very easy to pick the wrong people to work with. I've done it before. Most people will do it. And it's not for the reasons you would expect. It's not because all people are assholes, or it's not because people don't believe in the projects. It's because you need to be able to trust each other and communicate. And that's, I think, the biggest mistake people are doing when starting a business is just, or starting any project. I don't want to say business, just any project. Is they're finding people who are good at what they do, but not good for what they're doing.
For them, as well. So I get this a lot from young founders who want to start up, and they come to me and they're like, oh, it's me and a bunch of my friends, and we're starting this thing. And I'm just like, oh, shit.
Exactly.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
It's really, really difficult. And, at that age, also probably unnatural to speak in such professional terms to your friends, but it's really necessary. Like, you need to have that conversation of, yes, we're friends and we get along and all of that's great, but
there's going to be power structures.
Yeah, are we going to be good business partners?
Yeah, and probably not. Sometimes yes.
Yeah. No, that's it. Exactly.
Yeah, because I would say my best friends in the world, I would never work with them on projects. Yeah.
Yeah, I could agree.
Yeah.
It depends. It's like, it's very tough. And I went to visit some of my good friends who are entrepreneurs in Montreal recently, and he really managed to build a team with his friends that works. And we were talking about it, and part of it was that, like, he brought them on because they had great skills, and then they became very good friends.
Yeah, right.
So there's nothing saying, like, don't be friends with people in business, but just go into it with the right intentions.
Right, exactly.
What do you think people could benefit from in the tech entrepreneurship space?
Well, I mentioned this earlier as to why I'm on the Nanome team. We need more aesthetics. We need aestheticians, which is artists, but more generally people in design and people who are more human-oriented. I mean, we've seen over the past few years, I've been to Silicon Valley a couple times. I hated it all the times I've been there. Not to say that amazing things aren't happening there, but I think in the tech space specifically, aesthetics plays such a huge role, and not just in marketing and advertising, but in the way people interact. An understanding of irony is so important, and this is one of my biggest qualms with Tim Ferriss, actually, because I listen to his show and I think it's so great, but I don't find him funny or the people on it funny, and it's because they don't know, these are highly technical people generally that don't understand irony, which is sort of the core of humor, and they don't understand. Narrative has a huge role in irony. You know, when a hero fails to achieve their goal, there's irony in that. They've gone and done that, and they've achieved something else than they intended, usually. And understanding irony is a huge role in communicating with other people, in recognizing trends and things that are going on in a company. Irony is a difference between what is said and what is meant, or what is happening and what was intended, more generally in tech. When you can understand that, and that's something, irony is super important in any form of art, because that's what you're doing, and shifting, you know, you're incepting ideas into minds through deception and whatnot. And if you can really grasp irony and bring it into the tech space, you start to see patterns that other people aren't seeing. Oh, that was a failure, but here's something else that came out of it. You can recognize that with the understanding of narrative and irony. And you also need aesthetics because, you need good design work, and you need people who have human values and people who have approached projects, big projects that are highly creative. I think for me personally, I've worked on films, everything from features, music videos, you know, small commercials, dumb student films, you know. I really don't see a big difference between those projects and tech entrepreneurship. It's the same thing. You learn to run organizations, you learn to make decisions effectively, and it's all about cultivating quality and aesthetics. So when you usually make movies, right, I've written, you know, I write a lot of music with some friends, and, you know, I write fiction too, which fucking who doesn't, but, you know, what you're trying to do is cultivate quality, and when, in the case of movies and music, you're doing that with other people. It's an organization, and your end outcome is you're trying to create something of quality. Well, in business, it's a little different. You're working with a bunch of people, and you're trying to cultivate profit, usually. But really, if you're familiar with cultivating quality, you'll generally create profit out of that. And that's something I think the aesthetician can bring to the tech space. And I
really
also
like that, yeah. It's going about it the reverse way, where you put in the good work, good results will follow.
Yeah, exactly. And also the aesthetician, you know, artists tend to ask funny questions, and that's what needs to be asked at a lot of startups.
Yes.
It might make sense to the tech team, but it might not make sense to the artist, and that's where something usually, that's where something important is usually lying.
Right.
And I find, yeah.
The importance of asking stupid questions. Both Richard Feynman's dad and Malcolm Gladwell's dad have been known to do this, where they'll just ask the stupid questions, which actually end up being the most insightful, because in doing that, the person who usually explains, so let's say it's a tech entrepreneur who's like very into the technical side, doesn't understand that the work he's doing won't have an effect unless people can understand it.
Right. And that's what, you know, that's what I find myself doing at Nanome all the time. We talk about all sorts of things that are important from a engineering or architecture perspective, and I have no idea what they are. And I'm like, wait, why? Why are we doing it that way? And to everyone else, it's obvious. But there's a reason it's not to me, and I think that's so important. That's a great point. Yeah.
Is there anything you're struggling with now, or anything you're having a difficult time trying to manage?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I'm always struggling with shit. Chronic health problems, most recently. I'm a fairly, like, by most metrics, I'm an athletic, healthy person. I care about nutrition. I get enough sleep, you know. I get exercise, but unfortunately, I've had 2 surgeries in the past year. I had a deviated septum. I had ruined my nose, my throat.
That was so bad.
My throat. I just explained earlier, was in the ICU for tears in my throat. I lost half the blood in my body. I have sleep apnea. I have just all sorts of gastrointestinal problems since I was a little kid. Real, like, pain in the ass things that I've learned to tolerate. But the problem with that, and what I'm learning now, is I need to approach these more from, like, a business or a pragmatic perspective. I've learned to tolerate these things, but they're having a huge impact on my day-to-day life. And now I'm trying to approach them more from, like, a like the arrow shooter, like
how do I mitigate
how do I mitigate these risks and how do I solve these damages and going to doctors more actively and trying to make changes, not just accepting and tolerating. There's something to be said for acceptance of struggling in state, but there's also something to be said of
taking action,
mitigating suffering when it doesn't need to happen. So that's one thing I'm really learning to do right now.
That's a really important point, and I want to touch on it for the misguided Stoic, right? The guy who's like, oh, chop my leg off, whatever, but it's cool, like I don't want to do anything about it and I'm going to be fine, is not what we're talking about. Like we're talking about like you can choose. Stoicism gives you the option to choose, am I going to let this affect my mentality on the day-to-day, or am I going to take action and mold this unlucky event to my advantage?
Right, exactly. It's so tough to do too, is to find that sweet spot. It's like, where's the diminishing return? Because you want to work right up to that, and then you accept it. Yeah. Oh, and then the other thing I'm having difficulty managing, I mentioned earlier, is just learning to have fun. Yeah. It's super hard, but I'm getting there. I'm excited. Yeah.
I'm getting there, guys.
Yeah.
Who are the biggest influencers in your space, and how have they influenced you?
So there's a few. In my space specifically, Naval Ravikant, amazing Twitter. I think there's a lot of podcasts and stuff he's on. Check out his stuff. I don't know if he's written any books or anything, but thought leader in blockchain. Fred Eshram, founder of Coinbase. Brian Hoffman, creator of OpenBazaar, which I personally believe is going to be the first killer app for cryptocurrency. Someone would argue that the first killer app was the Silk Road and other darknet markets, which I happen to be quite familiar with, but those were great apps, but they don't have that killer accessibility of OpenBazaar, which is essentially the first decentralized eBay, and it has the power to change economics and commerce everywhere. I really think it's a big deal, so check that out. Brian Hoffman is a funny guy, super talented, super human as well, which is nice, like very human, like gooey human, not like superhuman like Superman. And then the Consensus team, which is just a team of people in the Ethereum specifically space, in the blockchain space. They're based in North Brooklyn, doing some very thoughtful, oftentimes esoteric work in blockchain. And then two people intimately involved with that are Dennis Nazarov and Jesse Walden, who were my superiors at MediaChain, and they're two great people that I think are doing some tremendous, really great work, really great thinking about blockchain. I would encourage everyone to check out their work and their writing and Twitters. Yeah, and then Tim Ferriss, who comes up so often in tech entrepreneurship. And
he's everywhere.
Yeah,
he's literally. I mean, he's the 4-hour man in every freaking space.
He's so great at what he does, and I love Tim. I could teach him a few things about jokes, I think, but shout out to that guy. Like, definitely a weirdo. Definitely excellent at what he does. Yeah. One person I would add on to that list is Benjamin Bratton. He's an advisor to Nanome, but I initially got into his work. He's a design philosopher. Talks a lot about futurism and some very exciting, crazy esoteric stuff, but it's not actually that. It's the language is esoteric, but once you get what he's talking about, designing for the future and the implications that technology has on us as human beings, incredible work, really informs my thinking and our thinking as a company.
Is his positive, like his general take on what tech will do?
It's very dystopian in some ways, but his one of the major postulates of his is that we need to shift our values away from superhumanistic values into values that are much more sort of in the gradient between humans and technology, because the problem isn't that these AI things are going to come in and stomp all over us and want to kill us. Want to kill us. It's they're not going to care.
Right.
That's much scarier. Is when they don't care. So that's the future we have to prepare for. Is one in which humans and computers are important, and it's scary from one perspective and very exciting from another.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend Benjamin Bratton. Other sources of inspiration and mentors, I could say. Inspiration, all the people I listed before. I love music. Lorde is a big one. Actually, growing up, a lot of female musicians were like really big idols for me, It's something deep in my psychology I have to figure out. But yeah, Lord is a huge one. Someone else in my age group who I believe is so perfectly herself and such a fantastic mastery of language and really cultivates quality in what she does. Father John Misty is a huge one, folk musician. He's got a good grasp on irony and narrative, so I would definitely recommend that. So many musicians and filmmakers, but moving more into the mentor space, James Serino, who mentioned earlier at Kinetic Productions, Justin Chon, great actor, you might know him from Twilight, a good friend of mine, really great role model. He was at Kinetic Productions. Yasha Grubin at Pangea Vision. Wynton Marsalis, who I don't know super well, but I had the opportunity to spend a couple days with him, and having like 8 hours of conversation. At the right time, he said the right things, and he really changed the way I think. And I would like to, the whole notion of a mentorship is kind of funny to me, but I guess I would consider that guy had shifted so many of the ways I think, and I'd love to, someday share the conversations we had. I recorded all of them, so that's something awesome. I look forward to doing. Awesome. But yeah, those are the people that I'm drawing most actively from now. Yeah.
Quickly to touch on Benjamin Bratton's work, I would definitely also point people towards both the books Sapiens and Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, those are fun.
Super, super good and relevant to how tech will affect us in the future. When you think of successful, what is the first thing that comes to mind?
Just someone I'd actually want to be around and keep in my life. I mean, it's as simple as that. Yeah. That success is people that you'd actually want to share this experience with, and it's not that common, but when it's there, it's great. And yeah, that's real humanistic, gooey success. It means your energy is worth sharing, and alongside that, generally sort of synonymous is anyone who does what they do well and also enjoys it simultaneously. And those things are usually mutually exclusive. But occasionally you find someone who's very good at what they do and they like it, and that's very exciting to me. Those are the people I want to be around.
What is something you do that everyone else thinks is crazy? What do you do that's unorthodox? Is there something you've stuck with despite everyone telling you not to?
Most recently, the all-meat diet. I've been pretty much on it for like a week now. I've done it before. It's pretty great. There's I don't know if it's grounded in anything. I feel good.
That's
Zero
good.
carb.
I mean, that's the thing with diets. It's gotta be your own feeling.
Of course, I wouldn't recommend this for other people unless they really want to. I microdosed on lots of different psychedelic drugs, LSD for a while. There's not so much stigma with that, but it definitely had to stop, and people thought it was insane if they're not familiar with the concept.
Yeah, this is like super common in Silicon Valley, but most people who don't have any, whose last thought of LSD was Nixon outlawing in the 60s. Yeah. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs will very often microdose small doses of psilocybin in order to enhance creative cognition and problem solving.
Yeah, and it's something I would definitely consider if you're interested, but do a ton of research, be careful, recognize it's illegal, and be wise, because there are consequences. It is a cool platform to explore. And the last crazy thing I do, or that drives other people crazy, is I don't reply to text messages usually, unless they're actually worthwhile.
Yeah.
And it's had pretty close to zero negative effect on my life. I think I have 300 unread text messages.
Okay, so I love this so much because the amount of times where I do that and then I get so much shit from people just like getting offended that I didn't answer, and they're not asking anything, or they're just like saying a statement that expects some sort of response that has absolutely like no value to add.
Yeah.
So I love that you feel that way too.
Yeah. I think other people need to embrace it. My dad embraces it.
Yeah.
My dad does not reply.
Yeah. It's been said. We can like all save time and move on to productive things now. If you could put anything up on a billboard for people to see every day as they go to work, what would it be and why?
I'd probably leave it blank. I think that would have the most lasting effect. Affect with an A and effect with an E. I'm just learning about advertising now, and I've always hated advertising, and now that I'm having to do it, it's so crazy to me that, there's a 2% conversion rate on your typical advertisement, no matter where it is. And that means that 98% of the people whose space and attention you're invading are getting zero benefit.
Yeah, if not negative.
Yeah, so if I had a billboard, I would leave it blank because I think that would really catalyze some critical thought.
I think that'd be really good. I think that would give people like a second to be like,
that's a real kick in the nuts.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Where can people find out what you're up to, what's next in your world, or just get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, so I just got back onto social media. Twitter at Ottomanbob, OTTOMANBOB. So pretty much any platform that I'm on, that's my username.
He's got the most unique alias in the world.
I'm proud to say that I've had the same username across my entire internet existence. Linked to my Twitter is my Medium account, which I think is probably the most valuable resource that I put out on the web. Usually my thoughts on the Matryx project, what we're working on, as well as my thoughts on other things, mental health, crypto. I'm going to start posting more stuff about the arts soon. Definitely check that out. I also have a blog that's a bit more inaccessible. I use it more as a journal for myself, like I was saying with social media. But yeah, blog.ottomanbob.com, and then my website is ottomanbob.com. Definitely check that out if you're really curious. And then my newest project is called Roll with Alice. It's a new supplement for neurotoxicity reduction and harm prevention with recreational drugs and partying. It's something that I've been working on for a couple of years now, and I'm really excited to release. It's sort of my baby. I think by the time this podcast is up, it'll be ready for pre-order. But check it out, rollwithalice.com.
I love that. All this stuff will be in the show notes. Mm-hmm. If you could ask anything of our audience, anything that you would like listeners to think about or do, what would it be?
The usual things, of course, read, practice some form of meditation. I think reading is sort of the entry point into anything. Mm. If you can cultivate interest in things and a sustained attention span, which are two things you can do through reading, then you'll have the next steps for whatever else you want to do. But I think on a more specific note, and this is very specific to me, get rid of the stuff that you have.
Yes.
You don't need 90% of it. That's changed my life. About 5 years ago, I really embraced this pretty hardcore minimalism, just getting rid of things chronically, and it feels so freaking good.
Yeah.
I buy things all the time, man. I buy stuff, but they're usually experiences, food.
Yes.
Things with actual utility. I have a bunch of tech in my life, and it's from my business. It's not for me personally. And just get rid of stuff. It's so easy to do once you cultivate that muscle.
Feels so good.
And it feels amazing.
I'd definitely add to anyone who travels frequently, like, try on your next trip to bring as little things as possible, and then just keep those things and get rid of everything else. Right.
And
just see what happens.
What you can do is sort of thin it down to your bare minimum, cut that in half, and then set yourself a budget of like $120, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you go on your next trip, you can use that budget to buy whatever it is you forgot. And chances are you might end up spending $5 on AAA batteries or something. We need so little and we use so little. And I think our generation is actually beginning to recognize that and embrace it, which is really exciting. So that's my call to action for everyone. And then the other thing is check out Matryx, right?
Yes. Okay. So, Autumn, this has been a super awesome interview. Guys, I cannot encourage you enough to check out Matryx. It is honestly the coolest thing that I have ever come across. And this has the power to change the entire science revolution, especially in tech and engineering, for the entire world in the century to come. It's like so huge. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
Really,
I would agree.
Pushing hard.
Yeah.
I'm pushing really. I don't push hard unless I believe in it, and like this is one of those things. So check out Matryx.ai. And the intro video on the show notes.
Yeah, and that's Matryx.
Yes.
Not like Neo. It's a fun one. But yeah, and follow us on Twitter at Matryx_AI. Thanks for having me, man. This is really fun.
Yeah, thanks for
I
coming
hope we
on,
get to do it again.
This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Woo!
Wow.
Damn, that was long. Thank you for listening. You can see all the show notes at echostudio.co/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know in the comments. I love hearing what people found valuable. And subscribe so you can get all our episodes in the future. Speaking of which, you're probably wondering what you can expect from Echo Radio in episodes to come. We'll be answering all the burning questions we get about starting your own online business and other goodies like case studies from actual Echo Studio clients and students alike, exclusive access to great deals from other entrepreneurs and online course creators, actionable step-by-step trainings and inside scoops on how to keep growing exponentially, and most importantly, the best kind of edutainment by yours truly. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, keep working smart and living free.